Elephant in the room then. What is Windows 11 bringing to the table when it comes to the evolution of the actual Windows desktop? Now, in my personal opinion, there's no major revolutionary change that we're seeing with it. It's not like the big jump from 7 to 10 and kind of skipping out 8 in between, but you get the idea. It is pretty much the same core operating system, which does mean that we're really lucky that the same deployment processes apply that we've either already started applying with Windows 10 or are looking at on how we transform the traditional way of doing 10 and can keep that same momentum going with Windows 11. The other good news is that most of the things like settings and policies and stuff do largely apply the same to Windows 11. You can pretty much guarantee that if you already have a very good baked-in solution for your Windows 10 management, you can drop Windows 11 in and it will just work. Autopilot will go exactly the same with your imaging, with your task sequences. It's mainly just a case of swapping out the actual main Windows image. However, there's always got to be a but. One big thing that did crop up with this is that there are specifically some new hardware requirements when it comes to Windows 11. Now, the obvious one in the room would have been the whole TPM2. I've been talking about this as a requirement or a major recommendation when it came to Windows 10 at the first point. So a lot of organizations were already trying to make sure that they pivoted, but had quite an old legacy stock of devices that didn't have it, but didn't stop them going to Windows 10. It will prevent you from going to Windows 11 as an upgrade scenario unless you do start to put in, I want to say unsupported, not recommended, specific hacks into the registry to bypass any of the safety guards. So the TPM chipset is absolutely recommended and required to get to Windows 11 for some of the security features that Microsoft have embedded in it. Similarly, there is a CPU requirement. Now, while the TPM2, fine if you're not really wanting to use something like System Guard and stuff, could be something that could be mitigated. The CPU itself, you're not going to start ripping out CPUs off motherboards just to be able to do an upgrade, but it is a very key consideration as you start to do your assessments to be aware of which devices will officially support it, as the actual install will look for and actively block the upgrade on any CPU that is not on Microsoft's supported list. Now, the skeptic in me says this has a lot to do with things like the Spectre vulnerability from a few years ago, which put a severe impact on some of the virtualization capabilities related to the multi-threading aspects of the CPU microcode. Mainly because Windows 11 does try and introduce a lot of the virtualization-based security, so the VBS, things like hypervisor code integrity checks. So therefore, there would be a severe performance degradation if you didn't have the CPUs that put some of the workarounds for that original multi-threading vulnerability mitigation in it. The other thing to really call out, and only got this caught the other month or so, was that most organizations, when they do start to prep, will immediately go to their centralized group policy store and just copy the new group policies for new OS into the policy definitions folder. Please don't do that. Whereas before it was quite common practice, it's like, yeah, new set of ADMXs, just copy it across, drop it in there, and off we go. Microsoft have actually started to do some house cleaning when it comes to Windows 11 and the group policy conflicts. They've removed legacy settings, they've rearranged some stuff, and if you copy the Windows 11 into your central policy store, you do run the risk of both damaging group policies for Windows 10, especially if you go and then edit them from the new group policy sets, because settings have been removed and rejigged. The recommendation at the minute is, if you, quite likely, are currently still a heavy Windows 10 house, is to leave your central policy store on the Windows 10 ADMXs and use a Windows 11 dedicated device with a special registry key to look at the local group policy settings on that device for editing specific Windows 11 group policies. Now, I'll come on to it a little bit later, and as James has already mentioned, there is going to be some follow-ups on this, and specifically some webinars around modern endpoint management. I will say that this does represent both a tipping point and a very good chance to look at other ways to manage your settings on Windows 11 rather than just purely on group policy, which may avoid that extra overhead of management altogether. Apart from that, it's pretty much the same OS. There is obviously some UI changes, etc., to be aware of and make sure they're communicated out to end users. And there's a couple of new settings where, quite frankly, you want to disable some stuff like widgets and potentially the team's personal client within the Windows 11 OS. There's some really useful blog posts on the Learning Hub for that I might have written recently.